Mygavan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I am Arakir Garlajerthan, the head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer. Welcome back to this week's faction overview, or to the faction overviews, which this week is Harad. Disclaimer, this overview is entirely version 2. Harad have been changed so much since version 1.2 that this will not look similar to anything that you will know as a 1.2 player. The only reason I've included this now, though, is because we are almost at the end of these faction overviews. And if I leave Rune, Harad, and Khand till the end, then we're going to finish on 3 evil men nations. And I didn't really want to. And Harad is at a position where we can display it with how different it is. Additional disclaimer, apologies. The beginning of this is going to be very heavily intertwined with some mod changes. Because I can't talk about Harad's gameplay without talking about what has recently changed. And by recently, I mean 2 days ago. I recorded this on the 29th of April. And since Harad's overview last week, we discovered that, in fact, we had one region that was not being used. And you're about to see it more. But I've started Harad at the turn 1, but I will skip you won't see the loading section. But the reason I've started here is because this message now is updated, courtesy of El Monstero, and it now it's not the same as it was in version 0.52 or version 1.2. It is totally new for version 2, and it just talks a little bit more about what you actually now have to do as Harad. So I just implore you to read through some of that message before you get going. Right, I will see you when we get to turn 2. Welcome, here we are, turn 2. Right, I'm going to go through the overview in the same order that I normally do, so we'll talk about the quite severe map changes when I get to that section. So to start with then, the size of your domain. Let me just once again state, this is a version 2 overview. Version 2, at time of recording, 29th of April, is not available to download. You've still got a long time yet. However, in the interest of longevity, I'm recording version 2 videos now, so I don't have to re-record every single video when version 2 comes out, because not every faction has changed all that much. But Harad have changed substantially, as you can bloody well see here. Right, yeah. So your size of your domain is one region. You now begin with the city of Fine Abel on the shores of the Harnan River. Oh, on the banks, sorry, you don't have shores on rivers, do you? On the banks of the Harnan River. Your army consists of your leader, Serpent Lord Kuzaima. We gave Harad's faction leader a new name, courtesy again of El Monstero, and he is now called Serpent Lord rather than High Chieftain. We get to that in a moment. So Serpent Lord, and you get a couple of units of trashy spearmen and archers. Over to the left, you get Warlord Musab, who is your faction heir, and he's got a couple of units of trashy spearmen. And over to the right, you've got Utba, who again has trashy spearmen. And so you have one region, and you have barely enough for a single army at the start. But you can train out of your capital some pikemen, warband, spearmen, Radrim archers. You won't be able to train Muhad tribesmen. That's just because, rather unfortunately, there are 1 or 2 things about Harad that still need to be edited, because we just haven't had all the time. But it doesn't matter too much for this overview, because I can just explain it away. So, your leader, capital, unique bodyguards then. Well, clearly your capital is Finabel. Your diplomat trains from here. He comes from the Black Palace. As you will note, it has some other useful little benefits for you as well, but it is a one-off building found in Finabel only. Your faction lord, Serpent Lord Kuzaima, has Black Snake Guard, as does Warlord Musab, and as does Utba. You don't have any custom bodyguards yet, so hold on to that. And that's it. So those are your customs, your uniques. There aren't any at the start of the game. You get Spy as well, Udial, who's standing in front of your town. So then, Rebel Expansion. Well, under the new gameplay of Harad, Rebel Expansion is anywhere you want it to be. As you will note from the crossing there, you can cross right next to Finabel, so you can head north straight away if you wish to. You can head east and take either Amrun across the river here, or you can head further east and take Korondaj. You can, of course, now head south and take the newly revised Ankaragmir, which sits on the shores of this little oasis. Or you can head west and take Ramlond, which also has moved. So those are your immediate rebel provinces. Or, of course, you can go north and get Amun Aithel before Dol Amroth crosses the river. So that is rebel location. So your neighbours and diplomacy then, well, your neighbours now are no one. You border no one. Of course, Umbar are your closest actual nation, and off to the northeast are Khand, but you don't border anyone any longer. It's up to you who and where you go to border. In terms of actual diplomacy, you are allied to Mordor, Umbar, and Khand, and you are enemies with Dol Amroth, and Gondor. However, Umbar, it's currently up in the air whether or not you're going to be allied to them or not. That is possibly for changing. But again, a minor point. So that is the first enemy you're likely to come into actual contact with is Dol Amroth. They will almost certainly cross the river and go for Barad Harn, as they tend to do, and Gondor may also come across and get Tir Thoros or Tir Thraed, but they no longer get Ostithil in the turn 1 auto expansion, as you can clearly see. And they spend a lot of their time either going up to the Black Gate or trying to get Eastern Osgiliath, which in most of my test campaigns so far, Gondor have gotten Eastern Osgiliath before Mordor, so they will likely cross the river first, which is good. So, economy and buildings for Harad. Well, Harad are one of the few nations who are still restricted in that you can't get the largest sized cities. You can only go up to this, a city. You cannot go beyond it. It's the highest you can get. But in terms of castles, you can get up to a stronghold. So a keep, a castle, and a stronghold are all available to you. But you cannot get the largest tier of city. So you are cut off from some of the economy upgrades at the top there. Other than that, in terms of your guilds, if you go to your faction browser, you get a horse breeders guild. You're one of the few that do, because Harad do have a reasonable penchant for cavalry. So you get a horse breeders guild. You get the standard warriors guild that everyone does. It's called a Hasharin and a master Hasharin guild, courtesy of Anno 1404 once again. And that's your melee weapon guild. I think every nation in the game gets a warriors guild or some variation of it. So that's not really a new thing. I shouldn't say that's a terrible, terrible way of pausing between words. So that's it in terms of buildings and economy. Yeah, there aren't really any unique buildings per se, other than that we will cover in a moment with scripts, because there are a couple of scripts. But, so in cities, you're not going to be able to upgrade to the highest tier, so you won't get the highest level of markets or banks or things like that. So, but that doesn't mean that it's not easy to make money. It's very easy to make money with Harad, mostly now with the presence of the Harnan, less so with the presence of An Kadagmir, as some of you are already pondering looking at the minimap. So then, scripts. Well, let's now discuss this. So clearly, Harad have been edited. You no longer start with a large domain. You now start with a single domain. And the premise now is that you are a single, experienced and ambitious tribe. And your tribe are essentially the Black Snake, hence the name of the bodyguard. Your leader is the Grand Serpent of Harad, and he's Serpent Lord Kuzaima, and it's all very serpent-based. But you start with virtually nothing, and you need to do the following in order to unlock certain units. So at the moment, the Muhad tribesmen are not unlocked because I've evidently haven't yet assigned the correct labels in the in the EDB. But after you capture 3 more towns. So you need to capture 3 more rebel regions. You can then train Muhad tribesmen and Muhad beastmasters, and these are this unit. So the tribesmen are the javelin and the beastmasters are the mounted version, and you need 4 regions to do this. Once you capture 4 more regions on top of that, so you only need 3 regions more initially because you already have Finabel. And once you get 4 more on top of that, then you will unlock the Trollmen of Harad, both the Trollmen and the Trollmen Javelins. So these units don't come from a specific region, you just need a certain number of regions now. And if I'm not mistaken, it goes 4, 8, 12, 16. Again, subject to change, but this is the order that they unlock. So first units that you'll unlock after capturing 3 regions are the Muhad Tribesmen and Beastmasters. Once you get these 4 region total, then a general will spawn next to Finabel who has Muhad Tribesmen or Beastmasters, can't remember which one, as his general. So then this is how you get your unique generals. He'll have a couple of Muhad Tribesmen with him as well. Then once you capture 8 regions, you'll get the Trollmen and the Trollmen Javelins, and again you'll get a general who has Trollmen as his bodyguard. He will spawn at Finabel. Then once you capture 12 regions, which can be done entirely within Harad, so it's meant to be reasonably lengthy to get these, you will then unlock the Hashari. And the Hashari can't... The only issue with this is that the Hashari aren't actually available before the barracks event anyway. So it's just making sure that you have 12 regions by the barracks event and you'll be able to train them. But if you're a slow, methodical player, the Hashari will be blocked off to you until you get 12 regions. And again, a general will spawn with a Hashari bodyguard. And then finally, once you have 16 regions, you are deemed to have united the tribes. All of the tribes are now freely bending to your will. And you can then get the Mumakil. And a unit, I believe, of Mumakil, not as a general, but a unit of Mumakil is given in a spawn to you, along with some trollmen. So the basic idea of this is that at the moment, rather than conquering the tribes like you'll see with Rune when we cover them, so instead of conquering the tribes and gaining their units from certain regions, the premise here is that Harad is so vast that these tribes are scattered all over, and they're not based in any one region. So instead, they come to you for conquest and wealth and gold and ambition when they note that you're powerful, that you are becoming a powerful nation. And they hitch their banner to your banner, they hitch their wagon to your wagon, and they join you in your fight out against the enemies of the north. So the basic idea is that the Serpent tribe are the de facto or default tribe of Harad, those who hate Gondor and those who populate much of this land. But even then, you're still a loose confederation, and it's up to Kuzaimar to unite you all. And then you'll be able to train all of the troops. So that is the basic behind the script. I'll cover a few more things in the map changes in a moment. But the other script for Harad is what some of you may have seen, the Variag script. And this is quite simply that a Variag mustering ground is available to you in your capital city, so Finabel, and it trains all of these troops. And it's only available so long as you are allied to Khand. And then once you go up to the barracks event, there's a second tier of it that trains even quicker and trains even more troops. So you get a huge influx of troops from Khand. But if you are allied with them, you can train this in your capital, and it gives you 2 free upkeep, it gives you all these troops, there aren't any negatives. However, if you decide to break the alliance and attack Khand, then you can train you can build an alternative version of this building in their heartlands, it's only in the 4 regions over here, so Oibamari, Kizilkum, Strelutsakhand, and Amukhand. But in these 4 regions, you can then train a different type of barracks that has a few negatives, because you're essentially enslaving them. But it trains more units and faster because they're coming directly from this land. So if you stay allied to them, you can get Khand troops up in Finabel and they can move out with you. And you needn't worry about heading into Khand. And if you decide to attack and take Khand, then you can train some of their units from their lands. But do note that it has a negative order penalty. So the towns might not like you as much. Right, in terms of garrison troops, then the final script for Harad. The garrison is available in all of Harad's traditional regions. So Finabel, Ramlond, you'll get it in Ithel, probably Karnan, Amrun, Korandaj, and Karagmir. You'd even get it in Chelkar, Krukmahur. You get a garrison in all of the lands from Umbar right the way up to Rune, which isn't actually all that helpful because you don't intend to attack any of these people. But this is the lands where you will get your garrison. So once you break out into Gondor, you'll never get a garrison in any of Gondor or Dol Amrot's heartland. So as soon as you cross the river, garrisons are a no-go, basically. Why is Boromir going west? So you do just need to be cautious with that. Note that you won't get many defenders if you break into their heartland. So then, map changes, and this is going to intertwine heavily with modding. Let's just start at the top and work down. Amun Ithel now goes down to the sea and no longer stops at this ridge here, which allows Harad to go directly into Amun Ithel from the start without having to cross through the Mirlond province, Principality of. So that's the first key change. Second, Ramlond, of course, is moved. It used to be here by the coast. It is now in the centre by this hill range protecting itself. And there are so many changes. Gobel Mirlond, the Principality of. This river now goes up to the edge here, so you can't actually get through this gap. The only way into this land is across this bridge and this bridge, which is protected by the fort. Additionally, the Principality of Mirlond now crosses the river and covers this northern section. And yes, this is entirely to entice Umbar now into the game in the same way that Khand do. We are going to buff Dol Amroth, don't worry, but Dol Amroth now very much have to face Umbar coming up the coast, Harad coming through western Horondor, and Khand coming through the east. But Khand will most likely go up to Ostithil and Osgiliath, so it's likely Harad and Umbar here versus Dol Amroth. But Mirland has changed. There's a new river just here with a crossing there, and the crossing across the river is just there. Of course, since 0.52, the Harnan being widened is an entirely new map change, but I'm sure I covered that in the Umbar video. And it now goes up to, obviously, Amroon. This river here is an addition as well, and that little bridge there gives some protection, and it just marks the border there. And so there's that little river. There's additionally as well this river now that separates the Haruzan and Haradrim wastes, which comes down all the way to this little oasis in An Carigmere. Which brings me on to the oasis of An Carigmere. This is entirely new. An Carigmere's borders have been hugely edited. And this is key to discussing. This vast region at the bottom here that we are currently looking at no longer has a town in it. I cannot stress this enough. There is no town in this southern region. This is the same region now that is the north. So Forodwaith is the town for this whole region down here. There is no town down here. Now you can't actually cross this river, say for this location and this river at this location, to allow you to just go round An Carigmere. But you can't cross this river anywhere else. And additionally, the river over here has been extended somewhat, and you can't cross this one. And I'm investigating ways of adding a line of impassable terrain along the border here. So by version 2, you may not even be able to walk into this southern region. And the reason for that is because I think, even though I've stated it heavily in this video, not everyone will watch it. And there will be many people who enter this region looking for the town, and then will get very frustrated when they realise there is no town. You cannot claim this region. It remains rebel forever. So the border of the map now is the line that you see across the middle there. Now, An Carigmere is no longer going to be as wealthy as it once was. In fact, it's barely going to be wealthy at all. I am going to move all of the resources that are currently down here, but I'm going to separate them out amongst many of the provinces, particularly Corondaj. Which brings me on to Corondaj. Corondaj has been heavily edited as well, and the town used to be around here along the banks of this river. It is no longer. It is now nestled safely in this sort of valley between these two hill regions, which mark the border. So Corondaj's border now comes along the path of this hilltop region, comes around Sayakan and up. This little river's been added as well, just for a bit of flavour. And then, of course, that brings me on to what I said at the very beginning. We discovered that we actually had one region left. And in the interest of expanding the gameplay a bit between Harad and Umbar, although it could be again changed because it may give Harad just too much strength, but the region of Lerm Sakun has been added. And Sayakan, its village, has been added as well. So this is an entirely new region. Entirely new region. So vast changes have gone on Harad. Of course, there's minor border changes here as well. That black spot won't be there. I know what causes that. It's constant fear annoyance. Additionally, I am going to make it, or I'm certainly going to look into, I think I know how, that every tree that is currently in a desert will be a palm tree and not a European tree. But also do note that the desert has been massively expanded, and it now conforms a little bit more uniformly with what we know of the map. So beforehand, this was all grassland. It was an absolute joke. The desert was basically just Khand, which I believe is very incorrect. From most of the maps that I've seen, although granted many of them are fan fiction, the bulk of the desert comes in a big sort of horseshoe shape, like it now does, around this central region, up to Umbar and down, with An Carigmere and this little oasis forming the northern point. And this cool desert farm texture, which I really like. So the desert has been expanded, so you'll actually see a bit more desert now, which is good, rather than the vast grasslands. And there's a little bit of desert still in Khand, but it's more grasslandy now. So those are major map changes. I think that's all of the map changes to discuss for Harad. Yeah. So I can discuss auto-expansion. This is something that I need to cover. The AI version of Harad will auto-expand into its original domains, which is Ramlond, Amroon, Corondaj, which is over there, of course, and Amun Ithel now. It also, I believe, takes Kruk Mahur, and but it doesn't take Kruk Boyadla. I can't recall. Or does it? No, I'm pretty sure it takes them all other than Sayakan. So Sayakan will be rebel no matter who you play as. But Korandaj, Krukboy Adler, Kruk Mahur, Amrun, and Ramlond, and Amun Aithel will all be taken by the AI version of Harad at turn 1. Unless you play as Canned, which obviously I'll cover in the Canned overview. But I can just touch upon it now. If you play as Canned, Harad do not auto-expand, and that's an attempt to make you the main player in the south, and Harad are basically therefore just a side. You can either kick them out early and beat them, or you can let them try. But if you play as Canned, Harad don't auto-expand, but everyone else they do. But do note, they no longer expand into Gobel Mirlond, which is now expressly designed for Umbar to run up the coastline and get involved, which I'm sure they will. Much testing is still to come. We're still way away from version 2. But these are the bulk of the changes. So I think that's everything for the campaign map. So now all that leaves is for us to go over and discuss a little bit more in detail the units of Harad, because they have been changed from 0.52 substantially. So I shall see you on the battle map side. Welcome to the battle map side. So a quick overview of Harad shows very easily that they are a heavy cavalry nation, or no, that's not the word I mean. They are a populous cavalry nation. They have quite a few cavalry choices, and they've got a lot of infantry, but they're very low on the ground with archers. And that's a brief overview of them. Now, many of their stats have changed dramatically since 0.52. So I probably won't even link this time the old video because it is now totally irrelevant when you come to play version 2. And even these stats now are the stats that you're playing with in version 1.2. Because the stat changes were done long before 1.2. So this part of the video now is apparent if you're playing the game before version 2. We'll go into a little detail. Again, a little disclaimer. The break in the units and their lineup now is entirely based on their stats and not their appearance after or before the barracks event. And this is mostly because some units are available before the barracks event, but in very small numbers, even if really their true aim is to be available after the barracks event. So I've done it by just breaking them up where their stats actually show. So the front tier are your pure militia, then you've got essentially your line infantry, then you've got some sort of AOR level, which is a bit between the top and a bit between the bottom. Then you've got your introductory level, and then of course your elites here, and your general. There aren't any uber elites unless you count the Mumakil. Also note that lots of these units are restricted by region. So the visuals have not changed. Harad looks exactly the same, but do note that their stats have changed. This also includes their recruitment cost. The aim is for Harad to no longer be a horde nation, but instead to be a small yet incredibly aggressive nation, but that isn't very defensive. So this is your militia tier. You've got 4 defense, 2 of which is defense skill, which is not affected by arrows, remember. So they're very susceptible to arrow fire. But their attack is 4 and their charge is 3. This is your beginner spear unit. That's very, very high. Your morale is average and your morale response is impetuous. We've made Harad a really aggressive, bloodthirsty style nation. But they tend to have low morale in that their morale response is impetuous. They're not affected very much by morale shocks, but their overall morale is actually very low. So it's to try and show a sort of bloodlust almost, in that they're not really affected by changes to the battlefield, but equally they won't actually last all that long if the situation really, really, really turns dire. I don't know, bloodlust would see you go forever, but that's the best sort of thing that we can do. So the morale tends to be not that great, but the morale response tends to be very high. Of course, all Haradrim units get a bonus in desert, and you get a negative when fighting in snow. Snow, I should just correct this, because Kuru Guru Chan have reforged. No, the gentleman that does the High Rule Total War messaged me, and he asked, how have you made it so that units have a benefit in mountains? And I realised that I have been misleading you all for some considerable time. Terrain a negative in snow doesn't necessarily mean mountains. It literally means snow. So this essentially means they have a negative when fighting in winter, not mountains. So unless the region is perpetually snow covered, like Forward Waith for example, then that won't take effect. So this just means they have a negative fighting in winter really, because in winter it always snows in the game. So if there's snow on the ground, they won't fight as well. But these are your entry level, these are your militia. Now, their other militia units are, of course, archers, Haradrim archers. Now, Harad are not renowned archers, so the archers' stats aren't all that great. But you've only got 3 units of archers anyway, so... But even their militia, though, do a 3-missile attack. Their melee is 3, defense is 2. Now, these are still militia units, so they still are trash. They still will die easily, but they're just a little bit better than they used to be. They used to just be 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 across the board. So they've been thrice enhanced, and they will now stand up an awful lot longer. Now, the archers have terribly poor morale response and average morale, so not all that great. The range is 150, 18 missiles, and they're not very accurate. But these are your entry level. So your main dedicated units are the Southron denoted units. You've got Southron pikemen, Southron lancers, Southron warband, and Southron archers. Now, this unit, really, before we get onto the Southron, is kind of between the militia and the Southrons, but these are the Haradrim raiders. These are archer cavalry. One of 2 archer cavalry units that you get. Well, 3 if you count the Mimikil. The Haradrim raiders are just very, very useful, and they will pester and annoy the other team to no end. I can assure you. I hate them. They have a 6 melee, 3 missile again, so not that great, but of course they're cavalry. They're very mobile, they can move around. Their accuracy is actually average as opposed to the poor accuracy of the archer militia. Their range isn't as good, smaller bows, and their missiles are only 28. Well, there's 28 missiles. They tend to have more missiles but less range. And those are the raiders. Again, average and average on the morale front. They can form the Cantabrian Circle. Or it's called a shooting circle in Third Age, but I always think of it as Cantabrian because that's what it was called in Med 2. So, Southron then, these are your main units, and the ones you're going to want the most, because these are a right thorn in every nation's side, are the pikemen. And interestingly, the first unit in the list, that's because these are mercs, I think. So, Southron pikemen are pikemen, which gives them that outrageously advantage animation. Their attack is 4, which is very good for pikes, charge of 4, and their defense is 8, which is incredibly good for pikes, actually. So they will be one of your most used and best units in the early game, particularly at the point before you unlock any of the AOR troops and you get some of the strengths from these units up here. Without these AOR, then the Southrons are going to be your best unit for a long time. Now, I can just tell you, though, that the Southrons do come in before the barracks event. They come from the first barracks tier, so you will be able to use them before the barracks event. The break here, whilst being the rough guesstimation, is also based on a proper, true valuation. Like it does roughly conform to this, so these you should get before. Now, the main line are the Southron Warband, and a considerable jump up from your militia. It goes from 4 to 7 and from 4 to 9, so almost doubled on the defense and a little more on the attack. So very, very aggressive unit. But do note that the defense is never really that great, that outrageous. And also note that most of Harad's defense comes from their defense skill and not from their armor, which does mean that arrow fire is a very, very, very effective way of killing Harad now, because armor plays a little part in their gameplay. They, of course, have average and get a bonus against camels and whatnot and mounts because they are spearmen. Just a brief note, your officers are Hashari, and there's your cool banner carrier with the black serpent. But anyway, science aside, Southron archers, so slightly better than the ones before. 4 missile now, 5 melee, and a defense of 5. Average and average again. It's better range, better accuracy, better missiles. These 2 are just standard archers. One's militia, one's an upgrade. They will do a lot of damage because 4 missile attack is good. So Dol Amroth will have something to fear with the Haradrim archers. And then finally with the Southrons, you get to the Southron lancers, your first dedicated cavalry unit. And a damn good one at that. Well, it's not amazing, but it's going to give the Gondor Cavalry Militia a run for their money, I can tell you that. So their attack is 6, their charge is 7, and their total defense is 7. So their attack's reasonably good. Their secondary attack is 5. So once they finish with their lance, they do pull out a sword, and it's only a 5 attack on that front. So they are a hit-and-run cavalry, not a prolonged cavalry. They will die if you leave them in prolonged melee. Apologies for the voice break there. Right, so then we get onto your first AORs. Now, the Muhad Beast Masters and the Muhad Tribesmen are both locked until you take 4 regions. And then you can train them a little bit in and around Harad. But they are locked until you have 4 regions, so you can't train them until then. But so you'll get 4 regions relatively quickly. You'll train these quite quickly. These units are your first ones that actually have a solid defense and it's 13. But again, do note, the armor is abysmal. This is the payoff. So Harad now have very high melee attack stats across the board, higher than almost anyone else at each tier. but their armor is abysmal. So their defense may be quite high, but their armor is virtually non-existent. And this means that they are actually quite good against armor piercing, because armor piercing has very little effect against them. It only takes their armor from 2 to 1. Defense skill is not lowered by armor piercing attacks. So they actually have a sort of twisted complement in that regard, in that they're actually quite good against armor piercing units because they've got no armor. But their defense skill is very high. So again, arrow fire will slaughter Harad. It is the bane of Harad's life. And unfortunately for you, Gondor actually get quite a few archer units, and Dol Amroth gets some Nimrodel Rangers right off the gate. So arrow fire and not necessarily cavalry is now the bane of Harad's life. But anyway, Muhad tribesmen get a bonus against mounts. They are javelins. They are effective against armor as well, which applies to their javelin only, I believe, and not their secondary weapon. And they're just solid javelin men. They are very good javelin men. They got good morale, impetuous against response. They're high accuracy, 65 meters in a 4 missile range. 4 missiles to throw, sorry. A missile attack of 9 is also very, very good. So the tribesmen are very useful. Now, they have a mounted counterpart, which is, of course, the Beastmaster. Now, Beastmasters ride a camel. This is the first real camel unit I think we've had. And, of course, a camel gets a sort of hard-coded benefit against horses. So the mere fact of having these camels near an enemy horse, I think what it does is it either lowers the morale or it lowers the attack of the cavalry that it is near. But I don't know for certain, because as I say, it is a hard-coded thing that a camel is effective against horses, or scare horses, as it says here. So I think it lowers the morale of cavalry units that they're fighting next to. I don't think it gives them an attack bonus against other cavalry. But I've never known for certain what the actual benefit is. But the Muhad Beastmasters, 10 missile attack as opposed to the 9 of the others. Their defense is slightly lower, and their melee attack is slightly better to allow them to hit the enemy. They are as well effective against armor, which I believe again means that it is their javelin and not their secondary weapon. Now, it does say it requires a desert region, but these text things will need to be changed, because these the Muhad Beastmasters and Muhad Tribesmen, I believe, only come from anywhere in the south, anywhere south of the River Anduin. You can get these. No longer is it just restricted to desert, because of course the desert is now really only An Karugmir, so that doesn't really line up very well. And finally, you get Camel Riders, again an anti-cavalry sort of sniper unit. They have a 12 defense, and again low armor stat of only 4. Only a third of their defense is their armor, and their attack is 6, which isn't all that great. Their charge is 5. Camels aren't really very good. The only real reason you would use the Camel Riders is because they do get that sort of hidden bonus against cavalry. So it's useful having a couple of them around to pester Dol Amroth's cavalry, but they're not going to win any major battles for you. They're not that great against infantry, and camels have... we think it might be something to do with their hitbox, but camels are just not that great. I would advise using these sparingly. Stick with the Southron Lancers until you can get the Black Snake or Serpent Guard as they are now. Camel Riders, again, these will be edited, so do not, for the moment, take note of that. If you can train it, then that is where it's meant to be trained, and if you can't train it, then that's on purpose. Training and restricting recruitment is incredibly easy, and very few bugs make it through. We might forget to change something, but it's never like a gameplay bug. It will be by design. So then we jump up to after the barracks event, and once again we'll stick with the pattern of going by the script. So once you've taken your 4 regions and you've unlocked the Muhad, you then take 8 regions and you unlock the Trolls. Now the Trollmen and the Trollmen Hunters are available before the barracks event in very small numbers, but very small numbers. And then after the barracks event they become available a bit more readily. And we'll start with the traditional warriors. So the Trollmen warriors are outrageous units. They have a 14 attack. That's insane. Their charge is 6 and their defense is 16. But beating the same drum for the millionth time, their armor is virtually non-existent. So arrow fire once again will bring them down, because if you're looking at arrows, their actual defense against arrows is only 6. So very susceptible to arrow fire in relation to the rest of their stats. Now, they are very costly, something I should have mentioned. Harad's troops now cost an awful lot more. You're paying sort of Gondorian prices now. But the payoff is worth it. And they may even be increased, who knows. The Trollmen warriors can also chant using the druid thing. which increases the morale of nearby units. They frighten enemy infantry. And they get a bonus against cavalry, despite not having a spear because of their size and ferocity. Now, again, they do not require a desert region. They just require any region south of the Anduin. This covers from Umbar right round to Khand. You can't get them in Rune. You can get them in Khand through to Umbar. Anywhere in the south, you can get trollmen. But once you cross the river, they're no longer available. In fact, anywhere south of Harondor, sorry. So you won't get them in Tirathoros or Ostithil or Tirathride, possibly even Barad Han. I think it's Harondor and down are the places you'll get these. They have a very good morale, impetuous morale response, but do note something that I'm purposefully left to last. They have 2 hit points, which means that they have a survivability that few other units can claim. The only other unit that has edited hit points are the skin changes of Anduin and the Berserkers and Nazkai of Isengard. Excuse me, sorry. Oh dear. So, an incredibly powerful unit. You really want to get those 8 regions out early because these guys will slay anyone. They laugh off every enemy that comes. But with them are the Trollmen Hunters. Slightly worse attack, slightly worse defense, but a 12 Javelin. These guys cannot chant. They are skilled against bounce. They don't have the frightened enemy infantry trait. Also, once these people have finished with their javelins, they don't use a sword and shield. They use a spear and shield. So they're very much more an anti-cavalry unit. They throw their javelins and then they hold the line. But they cost a little bit more to pay off than that, and there's the rest of their stats there. Right, so you've unlocked 8 regions, and then you come to unlock 12 regions, and you unlock Harad's famed hidden assassins, the Hashari. The Hashari are available once you unlock 12 regions, but they are locked till after the barracks event, so it won't pay off too much, but you will get them. Once you get those 12 regions, a spawn army will kick in, and it will have Hashari as its bodyguard and a couple of units of Hashari. So you get to at least play with them, but you won't be able to unlock to train them until after the barracks event. But they are available, I believe, everywhere. So there's no locked there. They have a 16 attack. They have an 8 charge. They have a 14 defense. And for the first time, a unit that actually has a substantial armor rating of 6. I say substantial. I mean, some units have a 20 or a 15 armor rating. So they actually wear armor. They're covered with that. But they can hide anywhere. They get a bonus against cavalry. And they are very good morale that is locked. They can't run away. Again, subject to change. Their morale response is only good, though. They get a bonus in desert, forest, and grassland. So they get a bonus. Basically, as long as you're not fighting in the snow, they get a bonus. So they are slightly better than actually shown here because they get a bonus in almost everything. Their ability to hide everywhere gives them some much-needed kick and allows you to do some nice ambushing with the Hashari. Do note that despite the fact that they have 2 swords, they actually use the sword and shield animation, which in practice you can't tell at all. But don't avoid them because you think the dual-wielding animation is terrible, which, side note, it is. If you are unaware, the dual-wielding animation in Med 2 is a joke, and it makes your unit basically nothing more than target practice for the enemy. That you just can't do anything with a dual-wielding animation. So any dual-wielding unit actually has a sword and a shield, and this is true for the Shari. But they don't have a shield stack, because of course they don't have a shield. But they do fight as if they are using a shield. But it actually looks really cool. They kind of block enemy attacks with their left-handed sword, and it looks really good. It lines up quite nicely. Right, there's also a new unit from possibly between version 1.2 and 2, or may even be in version 1.2, and that is an archer. The highest tier archers that Harad can get are the Hashari Shadows. And the Hashari Shadows can hide anywhere, like their sword counterparts, and they have the same bonuses, malices, and morale and whatnot as the Hashari. Their melee attack is only 12 compared to the 16 of their brothers. Their charge is only 7 compared to the 8, and their defense is only 12 compared to the 14. But they do a 7 missile attack damage. Excuse me, sorry, too early to be recording. Now, do note that these are not counted as rangers, so they don't get the 200 plus range, they don't get the very high accuracy, and they don't get the 32 missiles. They're not rangers. They are just very good hide anywhere troops. But of course they are locked until you get those 12 regions. So those are until we get to the Mumakil, no, those are all the units you'll unlock under the tribe system. So the tribes that join you are the Muhad, the Hashari, and the Trollmen. Everything else is deemed to be part of just your basic clan. These are your militiamen, these are your standard defense, and then these are your elites. Feeding into the theme that you are the Serpent tribe, essentially. So we come to your elites then, and the first, of course, are the Serpent Bladesmen. Now, these units, all 4 of these units look identical. They all take this same look, which is a plus or a negative. Serpent Bladesmen are just good warriors. So a 12 attack, which is high. Their defense is 20. 8 of that is armor. They are solid, dependable units. But you'll note that their defense isn't that high. 20 total defense is far below what Gondor's highest defense is. It's far below Dol Amroth's sort of even upper but not yet elite tier defense. So defense-wise, you're not really that great. And again, your armor is less than half of that defense. So once more, armor not playing a massive part, but an 8 armor is still very good. Your morale's very good, your morale response is good. You get a bonus against the Amrothian Swan Cavalry. Now that is the cavalry unit that is used by the Knights of the Silver Swan. So anyone that rides the same horse that the Knights of the Silver Swan do, these guys get a bonus against it. So they're designed to bring down the Swan Knights. Now, what I said at the beginning about units having high morale response and high morale, with Harad, it's very much up and down. Certain units have very good morale response, and certain units have average morale response. But the main theme running throughout is that not very many units actually have very good morale. Very good morale is not the highest tier. The highest tier is excellent. So they all suffer a little on the morale department. So Harad do break reasonably easily. But not that easily. I mean, they're not like orcs. So then, with coming in as your heavy cavalry, and the reason why you get the hordes, the horse guild, basically, are the Serpent Guard. This used to be the name of the bodyguard, but they're now Black Snake. The Serpent Guard inspire nearby troops. They get a bonus against other cavalry, so they're anti-cavalry cavalry. They get an attack of 9, and their secondary is 11, again, very high. A huge charge bonus of 13, but a somewhat average armor defense, again. 18's not all that great, especially for this kind of level of attack and defense. So the Serpent Guard are incredibly powerful hit-and-run cavalry. And when used to that effect, they can decimate the enemy. And they really are the unit that I have always, whenever I see this unit and it isn't a bodyguard, I'm always fearful. They might look reasonably light on the battle map, but trust me, on the actual battle, they will really hit your line hard. And they can just slaughter your troops if they catch them in the right way. Harad also get a second archer cavalry, and that is the Serpent Archers, which are just mounted Serpent Cavalry, of course. 10 melee attacks are not as good as their counterparts, but they get a 6 missile, charges of 6, and their defense, again, not all that great, but their armor actually being their best defense skill this time. Their accuracy is high, their range 130, miss 30 missiles. They get the same sort of bonuses as everyone else, desert and grassland, and they're not as good in forest and snow. Cavalry tends to always get a negative in forest. Regardless of which nation it is. Some nations are exempt from this rule, but a general rule is that all cavalry gets a negative bonus in forests. So do look out for that. But cavalry archers speak for themselves. They're very useful. They always have been. They always will be, because you don't have to engage the enemy, but you can get very close and then run away and shoot them as they chase you. It requires an awful lot of micromanagement, but if done right, they're very powerful. And then this is your general's bodyguard unit. This is any bodyguard that joins your nation, save for those from script, will have the Black Snake Guard. And they are just Serpent Guard, but better, as you will note. So their attack is 10 compared to the 9 of the Serpent Guard. Their charge is 14 compared to the 31. And their defense is 21 compared to the 18 of the Serpent Guard. So they are just better Serpent Guard. So there isn't really anything else to say about them. Good morale response. Secondary attack is 11 as well. So the secondary attack is the same. So they do charge a little bit better. They survive a little bit longer, but there's far less of them. In fact, there's a third the number. Do note that if the text remains accurate at this point, and I haven't edited it and forgotten, then Hashari and Hashari Shadows are the only 2 units that will never run away. However, this is likely to be changed, and it will likely be the Trollmen that never run away, because I think of all the units of Harad that wouldn't run, it would be these bloodthirsty slayers. So it will likely be the Trollmen that will never run away, and in fact, why am I saying likely? It will be the Trollmen that will have locked morale. They will never flee the battlefield. In version 2, Trollmen will never flee. You will have to either tell them to flee, or they'll die. Because you can tell your units to withdraw, and it's not considered routing, it's considered withdrawing. And as long as your unit has movement points on the campaign map, you can always withdraw. But these gentlemen will never flee on their own. You'll have to tell them to. So if you run out of movement points, they will fight to the death. There's nothing you can do about it. The Hashari will no longer be locked. So then finally, the Mumakil. This is a standard Mumakil battalion, 5 of the great Mumaks. The textures, unfortunately, when stretched out to cover giant things like this, really make the game show its age, don't they? I mean, when you consider the archers, they look reasonably clear and crisp. You can make out the woodworking around their necks, the pattern on their armor. They look reasonably good. I mean, they're not winning awards against Warhammer's level of detail or anything. But when you then look at a unit as big as the Mumakil, the game engine shows its age, unfortunately. They just look like big masses of grey with with a few features. But anyway, they're just giant elephants, as you might imagine. The gentlemen on top fire arrows from the howdahs, or howdah. The name of the great thing on top is called a howdah, as far as I'm aware from Indian history. They inspire nearby troops, so just having them on the battlefield is a benefit. Now, it says javelins thrown before charge, but what that actually means is they will use their arrows up before they charge the enemy, because there was a big problem whereby the Mumakil would just run straight into the enemy. And once they're in melee, their archers aren't as effective. You'd think the archers will be firing down on the enemy, but they don't actually tend to do that. They tend to stop when they're in melee. If you do get them firing, then brilliant, but they fire far better when they're out of melee. And this little caveat here allows them to the AI then to actually use their arrows before they charge the Mumakil in. Because why would you not want to do that? You might as well use an extra unit of archers, which you have here. They're just cavalry archers, but they are quite slow, of course, remember. They frighten nearby enemy infantry, of course. Now, the Mumakil are only available in Finabel, and Karagmir, and Sayakan, the new region off to the far east. Those 3 regions are the places you can get the Mumakil training ground. So they come from the furthest away. You will get 1 unit of them when you claim 16 regions. So you get a free gifted 1 unit of them. That won't be a general, that'll just be a unit. As you can see, their melee is outrageous, their defense is very high. 14 hit points. Their missile attack, though, is only 6, which isn't actually all that great. The Mumakil themselves don't actually... no, they do. That's NA because it's just off the charts. Their armor is obviously very high, their defense skill is very high. 14 bloody hit points. They get a bonus against other cavalry, all other kinds of cavalry. They're not very good at fighting in the forests or the winter. But the real question with Mumakil is how do you bloody well kill them? And the answer to that is siege. Ballistae are outrageously effective against Mumakil. Also, catapults, if they can get a hit, can probably bring them down in 1 shot. Dwarven catapults will laugh Mumakil off. Additionally, if you must face them without siege equipment, then anything with armor piercing is always very advised, but ideally anything from range. Now, the Mumakil's strength isn't necessarily in its ability to kill the enemy, it's in its ability to disrupt the enemy, as I will show you when we fight against the nation we're up against. I'll just run the Mumakil in. So everything else, let's put into a nation, into a group. Give that to the AI. Right, so Mumakil's strength comes from their ability to disrupt, not their ability to kill, per se. And I'll show you that as we come up against Mordor. So Mordor are going to be next week's faction overview. Very little change to Mordor, and I really don't like Mordor, so I'm not looking forward to it, to be honest. But do note that one of the Mordor units crashed my game, which I've actually written down this time, because I can easily work out which one it is and fix that. But one of them crashed my game, so the roster we're going to be up against is very small, with very few units, I'm afraid, because I had to do... I wanted to get this out quicker because I'm off today. I'm going out, so... I couldn't waste my time this morning and find out which unit it was. But, so Mordor will be next week's, and for now, though, I will show you the power of the Mumakil. As our AI begins doing what it's doing, our archers are already firing from atop the howdahs of the Mumakil. There's the Mumakil's smaller, arguably more useful brother, the Great Beast, with their javelin troops, staring off at the granddaddy that gave birth to them. Now, do note that that is just metaphorical in relation to the mod. The Mumakil did not give birth to great beasts. They are unrelated species. The Mumakil just inspired the beasts. Right, so here we go. The Mumakil can charge into the enemy, And you can set them to constantly just keep charging to behind their line, and look what they do to the line. It's as if it is not even there. They just kick units out of the way. Like a bloody hot knife through butter, they just plough through. They literally plough through. Although this is going to be an interesting little face-off. Let's see how the Great Beast and Mimikil fight against each other.
Victory is well within our grasp.
Oh, this time we are likely to win, by the way. We massively outnumber the Mordor. No, they're all just sort of nudging each other. Yeah, have that, you. Take that, little one. Mimikil are much better than Great Beasts, so this fight would be it will be a win if no one else got involved. Oh, one of the beasts is down, toppled by the great creatures. Oh, and another one, and it actually looked like he genuinely knocked him over. How good is that?
Let's see how these snakes fight without their head.
Mimikil, surprisingly, another big problem of the Mimikil is their massive hitbox, which means they can be hit from so many sides at once. And you want to think that they're actually outrageously powerful, but in actuality, they are not that great. A human player can use them to devastating effect by just doing what I'm doing, walking backwards and forwards. Every time they walk over the enemy, some of those units that get knocked over do die. And it's a very good way of disrupting the enemy force. Oh no, our Serpent Archers have joined in, steering the Mimikil on. Do note that even though they fire arrows, the symbol is for a javelin. But they do fire arrows. And as you can see, they do shoot while they're in melee, but they're just a little better at it when they're not in melee. And also, of course, in melee, they're more likely to die. So there they are, all nudging those remaining Great Beasts. Anything that gets involved in front of them will get hit. Look at that. Look how many he just killed in one swipe of his tusks. See, against pathetic little orc units like this, they laugh them off. They just shrug off these guys. These orc hosts don't have armor piercing. They don't have a high attack. They have a poor defense. He's just killed about 30 in one nod of his head. They are devastating. But if the enemy, i.e. you, the player, because you're going to be the one that's facing them most likely, if you actually just use your head and know what counters them, siege, armor piercing, range, you can bring Mimikyu down quite easily. So they're not to be that much feared, but it is bloody good fun running them around the battlefield, just slaughtering everything that stands in their way. Now, the last thing to note about the Mimikyu is the following. If I set them to run over there, then do note this. You might have to just click incessantly to get them to not attack. But we're about to cross our own line, and you can probably tell where I'm going with this. They disrupt their own forces. Oh, he just kicked that man for bloody miles. So you need to be very careful with your Mimikyu, because as you can see, they will also trample your own forces, as if your forces just don't even matter. Slaughtering them. But also note there as well, I said note about 1,000,000 times, but those Serpent Bladesmen, the Mimikyu just ran through them and not a single one died. So do note that while the Mimikyu's actual attack is really, really high damage, them walking over the enemy doesn't actually really hurt the enemy. Oh, well, that is something I've never seen. The Trollmen don't flatten. Is that because they're locked in? Yes. So Trollmen are actually immune to knockdown damage when they're in mid-chant, which is a very interesting little feature. Can you knock them down now? Yeah, there you go. So when they're doing their druid chant, they're actually immune to knockdown, which is quite interesting. Anyway, obviously we were going to win this, I'm afraid, because the army we were up against is very small. But you all know what Mordor's army looks like. Everyone knows what Mordor's army looks like. The whole Mordor overview is basically just to talk about these guys now, these like rhino-looking beasts. But that will conclude the Harad overview, and for once our general has survived. So, ha! Not this time. Harad, so then a last touching closing word on Harad is that Harad are now an incredibly aggressive nation, very high attack stat. But they pay for that with a terrible armor stat. They have virtually no armor. And they are, if you were to ever come up against the elves, you would get horrific payoffs. The elves would slaughter you. In fact, the elves are arguably Harad's now worst matchup. Because your main weakness now is arrow fire. But Harad are a nice little fun campaign, and the uniting of Harad that you've got to do before you can hit out is interesting. And because none of your units are locked by individual region, it doesn't matter if you let Umbar go up the coast. It doesn't matter if you let Khand go up the coast. But do note that if you don't want Umbar to go up the coast, you simply have to capture Gobel Mirlond, and Umbar won't get involved. Likewise, if you don't want Khand to get involved, you simply have to capture Imlad Khanan, and her Khand will then be out of the game. So it's very much up to you when you play as Harad who you want to actually fight with, or indeed who you want to fight against. You can go up, take Osgiliath and hit Gondor, and let Umbar deal with Dol Amroth. Do note, though, that if you try and take Gondor and Dol Amroth on alone, depending on how effective you are at the hit and run with the cavalry and the outrageous attack of Harad... No, what am I saying? If you take on Dol Amroth and Gondor alone, you'll probably still win. But we are going to beef Dol Amroth substantially, so... Mostly for the AI, not as much for the player. But that will conclude the Harad overview. This is a very lengthy one because there were many changes to Harad. Do let me know your feedback. Let me know what you think about the regions in the south. Do note that the Sayakan, whilst it may not be in the best location at the moment, I couldn't really think of somewhere else where it would fit quite nicely. So I actually am massively in favour of Sayakan being added and put there. I think that is at the moment, I think that's a good location with the vast changes to Khand and Harad and Umbar. And it also means that if Ankaragmir falls and you lose the ability to train Mumakil, there's a second location where you can train Mumakil outside of your capital. Because the Mumakil are actually not that hard to come by. I mean, you need the barracks event to train them, yes. But the Mumakil training ground's not that expensive, and you can get them quite easily if you want them. It's the AI that doesn't really go for them. But that will conclude the overview. So thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. I'm Arakia and as noted before, there will be no recording tomorrow on Monday because I don't have time to record on Sunday. Now that might change. I may have time to record on Sunday. I will have to yet see. But for the immediate present, that will be all. So until we speak again, dear friends, Navar, Naden, Pedimad, Melunin, and farewell.